So hello and thank you for coming to our webinar for HDR Light Studio. I'm Mark Segersby, co-founder of Lightmap, and I have assisting me on this webinar Louisa, who is a content creator here. And while I'm talking, she'll be able to answer your questions while I'm doing the demonstration. So who is this webinar for? Well, we've invited people who've recently tried the demo version of HDR Light Studio, and it's for people who are new to HDR Light Studio. And why have we created this webinar? Well, we know that you're interested in HDR Light Studio, and we want to show you how it works because you might not have had the time to try it properly yet. And in this webinar, we will get you up to speed with that. And we want to give you a chance to ask us questions directly as well that you might have about the software. So to start with, what is HDR Light Studio? Well, there's quite a few answers to this question, so I'm just going to go through some different options. So HDR Light Studio is a standalone application dedicated to creating lighting to use in your existing 3D software and renderer. So that's one explanation. HDR Light Studio provides a new technique for lighting your 3D images, and it's faster and more interactive than traditional techniques. HDR Light Studio is a real-time playground for HDRI lighting environment creation and control. HDR Light Studio provides a set of tools and content that enables a 3D artist to light a shot really fast with interactive feedback. HDR Light Studio is easy to use lighting software that enables novice 3D artists to learn the art of lighting and light their shots to a higher standard. So it's great for people who don't really know how to light very well yet. But also, HDR Light Studio provides professional lighting artists with the tools and fine controls to quickly and easily express their lighting vision. With real-time feedback, you can try out lots of different lighting ideas quickly and push the quality of your lighting to higher levels. So, HDR Light Studio is good at and famous for studio lighting for product and automotive shots, but it has wider uses. For example, you can edit existing HDRI maps to shape their lighting effect and to augment with additional lights or blockers to enhance the effect of the lighting on the final shot. So it's not just about studio lighting. So the end result of using HDR Light Studio is a HDRI map that is used in your 3D software for the illumination and reflections. And then depending on the connection that you use, it also creates 3D area lights in your 3D software, and these are mapped with the HDR content from HDR Light Studio, which controls the visual appearance of that area light. HDR Light Studio can also be used tethered to your 3D software using our plugin connections. Using HDR Light Studio connected with your 3D software provides a lot of benefits, and we can talk about that later. Okay, so what's next in this webinar? So first, let's have a tour of HDR Light Studio for about 30 minutes and just see how the software works and the interface. I'll then explain the benefits of using HDR Light Studio connected to your 3D software, and after this we can begin to answer your questions. Okay, so let's open up the HDR Light Studio interface. Here we go. So when starting Light Studio Standalone, which we're doing for this demonstration, your interface should look like this. If it doesn't, to change the layout, let's go to Window, Layout, Load, Default, Standalone. And then that will reset. And I'm going to fill the screen with the interface. So this is HDR Light Studio. So when we're using it standalone, the first thing that we want to do is load a 3D model to Light. And to do this, I'll press the play button, and then we get some options, and I'll choose Browse. We do include 3 demo models that you can play around with, but I'm going to browse to a model I've got on the desktop. And in the top bar here, within this render view, I can choose any cameras that are in the scene, and I will choose perspective. And then we can see this head model. Now I want to get a bit closer within this shot, so I can zoom and I can pan around this view if I want to. Importantly, it won't change the camera position. We're actually just moving around that fixed camera position. So I'll actually use this region zoom, and then I'll just do that to position it, and then I'll return to the light paint tool, which we'll talk about soon. So the render view, this provides a preview for the lighting. It's an interactive render, and it also provides an interface for controlling and positioning the lights. So this render view, we have settings for this. So if we go to where the light properties and click on the render view settings, and the render view HDR Light Studio, it shows you what the loaded model is. You could actually use this to browse and load a different model. And if we come down to the bottom, we have appearance settings, so we can change the diffuse color on this material. So whatever you load in here, we have a single simple material applied to everything, because the purpose is not to replicate what the materials are in your 3D software. It's to provide a generic material that lets you preview the illumination and reflections. So I'll actually return this just to be a neutral grey. And the reflectivity, we can change how reflective it is, and we can change the Fresnel. So I can use an index of refraction, and let's say if I leave that at 2, that'll be fine. And I will actually darken the diffuse colour on that shader. Now when I make these changes to things like the diffuse and how reflective it is, you will notice that this green bar is showing how the progress of the render. So if I was to kind of move the view, it will start re-rendering and collecting samples for that view. When this bar gets to the end here, certain things you could change, like the color, and we can do it instantly. You don't need to re-render to do that. And when we come on to start lighting, you'll also see that we don't need to re-render this view when we are changing the HDRI map. So okay, let's change that back to the grey. So this view, we can change the brightness of it, and we can change the brightness on many of these views when we click, hold and drag on this button, and if I double click, it will return it to the default of 1. So you can change the actual brightness of the view if you want. Okay, so that's our preview. Underneath is the canvas. This shows the HDR Light Studio lighting design, and it is in a ratio of 2:1. It is a HDRI map, a lat long map, and you can see by default, if we look in the light list, this shows us all the light sources that we've made with HDR Light Studio, and by default there is this default gradient background here, which we can see on the canvas. And if we were to turn that off, you can see that this render view at all times is being lit by the content of this canvas. So if I then turn that back on, now for a selected light, if we go to the light properties at the top there is a brightness control, and as I change that brightness you can see that changes instantly on the canvas and then instantly in this view which is lit by the canvas. And again, we can change the brightness of this canvas view, but it won't actually change the brightness of the lighting design. It's just our view onto it, because you can't fit a high dynamic range image onto your display. So if we had a really bright light source, you can use this to kind of see the different brightnesses within that lighting design. So I'm just going to double click that and return it to a brightness setting for this view of 1. Okay, so let's make our first light in HDR Light Studio. So we will basically click on the toolbar here, and this is a soft round light that we're going to make. Clicking on these add the light straight away to the middle of the canvas, and we can click in this view with this move tool, and we can move the light wherever we want on this canvas. And as we do it, you can see that the light is distorted, so even when the light is at the top of the HDRI map, it will remain a circle when it has been mapped onto the lighting sphere. And that's the great thing about HDR Light Studio, is that that is all handled in real time. And as we come to the seam on the HDRI map on this edge, you can see that the rest of the light is correctly mapping over that seam, which is really important. So to light this this shot, I can guess where to put the light, and I can just use trial and error. But the powerful feature in HDR Light Studio is if we use this tool here, which looks like a paintbrush in this view, and we now have this kind of paintbrush cursor, with the round light selected, I can click, hold, and I can drag on this view, and it will reposition the light on the HDRI map to reflect where I am clicking and dragging. Now, to make this more obvious, I will select my default background, I will turn down its brightness, I will select my round light, and I will increase its brightness. And then when I click in this view and I drag around or click, you can see the light is moved where I am clicking or dragging on the model. So we don't have to guess where to put the lights in HDR Light Studio, which is fantastic. Now, by default, the light paint mode is set to reflection. This means when I click here, the light moves to reflect where I've clicked. If we change this mode to rim, when I click in this view, it moves the light to the position on the HDR that's visible in the background. This means the light is placed behind the object, providing a rim lighting effect. If I change the mode to illumination, it will move the light to be normal to the surface where I click and to light and provide illumination to that surface. This location is different, as you can see, to the reflection location. So you'll see the reflection will not match. Now, if I turn down the reflectivity and if I turn off that background light and I click on the model now, you can see that where I'm clicking, it adds the light to that location. So if I was to click under the chin, it's lighting from under the chin. I actually find that most of the time I can use reflection mode, and actually it's really handy even if you are lighting something that's diffuse. Okay, so I'll turn up the reflectivity on this object. So there are your 3 light paint modes, and this will always position the active light in the light list, which is highlighted. And to change which is active, you just click on the light in the light list. So we've got one light on here, and we can easily duplicate that light using this edit menu, or we can right click and duplicate, and then we can then move that other light to the other side, and then we can duplicate again, or press Control D and then get another light around here. So really quickly you can duplicate lights, position them on the model, and you've got a HDR that is creating a nice lighting effect on the model. Okay, so let's have a look at the properties that you have for lights in HDR Light Studio. So we know about the render view and the canvas. We know about the light list. Importantly, in the light list, we have the on and off controls for lights, but we also have a column to solo a light, so we can see its individual contribution to the lighting. You can make lights so that they cannot be selected, and you can also lock lights so you can't edit their properties. Okay, so let's come over to the light properties panel, and above it you have a light preview. What this is it shows you the visual appearance of the lights you've got selected as a front-on view, because we can place lights on this map and they get distorted and it can be hard to know what they actually look like, and this provides a front-on view of the content for that light. Okay, so looking at the light properties panel, it's best to start really from the bottom, the content section. Content is what the light looks like, its visual appearance. And in HDR Light Studio we have a range of different content types. When we make this soft round light, the content type is a bulb. And we have controls over the width of that bulb, and things like the ramp controls its appearance from the center, its brightness from the center to the edge is controlled by this ramp, and we have various graph controls we could use for that. And of course the color, that we can use our color picker here, or we have controls for color temperature, which is really useful with lighting. So if I just make that light brighter, you can see this effect. So we can go from a cool right through to a warm light, or pick any color that we want. So this is procedurally generated bulb. We can have an image on a light, and we can load any image that we like. So it can be a light source, or it can be a low dynamic range image. So if I select the fire JPEG there, now when loading images into HDR Light Studio, it will prompt you to convert them into the .tx format. This creates a bitmap file that is tiled. What this means is you can load a huge HDRI map, and we will convert it into a file that stores multiple resolutions of that image at different sizes, so that when you're working live in HDR Light Studio, we only get the resolution that you need at that time, which makes everything really fast and efficient. And then when you do your final production render of your HDRI map and your HDR content, we will use the highest quality version that you need. What we'll do is we'll just press the convert button, and it will automatically save a TX version of the file with the same name in the same location, and then it will load it. So here we've loaded this image. Now it's an sRGB image, so when we've loaded that, we'll just select sRGB in the drop down, and we'll use the blend mode for this image as over. And now we've added this fire image that we can use effectively as a light source. So even though it's a low dynamic range image, we can change the brightness of this. Let's just change that to add actually. Okay, and then let's I'll just scale that up, go on to this in a bit. So we've got this image that we could place anywhere around this model and light it with this fire image. So other content type that we've got is a gradient that you can control, linear or radial. We have just a flat colour. We have a sky, a procedural sky, and we have a box gradient, which is effectively a vertical and horizontal ramp, and you can control these and produce some really interesting effects using this. And this is also good for masking and stuff like that. So there's these different types of content, and that is the visual appearance. So the next section up is transform. So we have this light. The visual appearance is what you can see in the preview. Where is it? Where is it positioned, and how big is it? This is the transform section. And we have the core settings, which are the main settings, and then we have the extended, which are the more advanced settings. So if I'm moving the light on the map, or moving by clicking in this render view using light paint, you can see the latitude and longitude, which is basically the coordinate of where the light is on the map, updates as you move it around, but you can use the sliders to position this also. Then we've got the width and the height of the light and the rotation setting for the light. And then depending on the mapping of the light, which we'll come on onto in a minute, this will update what these settings are. Also, you'll see there's an orange dot in the middle of the light, and there's an orange dot here on the light preview. This represents the handle by which we hold the light. So if we were to drag and move this to the edge, when we move the light, we're moving it by its edge. Now, if we were lighting a product, it would be really handy, because when we click on the model, we would be positioning that light with its edge going across the model. So if I was to open up, let's load one of the demo models of the watch. And then let's change the camera view and click on here and make that really bright. And let's turn down the diffuse because we don't want that. Okay, so if the light handle was in the middle and I was clicking to position the light on the watch, then it covers the whole watch face. But if I move the handle, it moves so that I'm holding that light by its edge. And it actually acts as quite a nice fine adjuster for the position of the light, because as you can see, as I move that handle, everything is interactive on that view, and I can get the light to fall across there exactly as I want to. So that is the handle position, and it can be moved dragging in the view, this light preview, or you can actually use these sliders to move it as well. And if you double click on the name field, on the name label, sorry, it will reset to the default location on that slider. We also have advanced rotations. What these are useful modes that you can use to lock the lights. So if I use rotation mode vertical, wherever the light is on the map, it remains vertical. If I do horizontal, wherever it is, it's horizontal. So you can see if it's on the horizon, I'm looking sideways down the light and it's very thin. As I move it up, it is still horizontal. And then we have fixed. What this means is wherever the light is, it will be aligned horizontally and with the x-axis. Now, with these rotations, I can click and drag on an adjustment in either direction for any axis. So I can basically make this light rotated in 3 axes to replicate any kind of position of that light in space that you want. So basically, content is what does the light look like, transform is where is it, how big is it, what's the orientation of it, and then finally we have the master settings for the light. And the most important setting is its brightness. So This can be adjusted by clicking and dragging on the slider, but we also have the big plus and minus, which will increase the brightness by a full stop or decrease it by a full stop. What we mean here is it will double the brightness or it will half the brightness. And the little minus and plus take it up by a third or down by a third of a stop. We then have blend mode. Now this is very much like Photoshop in that this is a stack of images, and the one at the base is at the base of the lighting design, and as you add lights on top they get blended. So these lights here that you make from the toolbar, they're really just a preset type of light. All the settings can be changed and altered afterwards. So by default the round light has a blend mode set to add. If we were to change this, let's say change this round light here, and we were to do this as over, and we were to make it dark, as we moved it over the other content it would make it darker. Now you can see it's not having an effect on this light because it's under it. So if I drag and move that higher in the list, you'll see that that is now affecting all of the lights, and as I drag and move it below you can see that its effect is only on the lights that it's on top of. So that's how blend modes works. And if we had a colour to this light, say made it red and turned up its brightness, we have blend modes like colour. So whatever we go over we can actually tint using a light. So this gets really interesting. So if I was to create a picture background light and load a HDR map, I will convert it and we'll drag that to the bottom of the list, and then we will hide that gradient, we'll hide the other lights, and we've got this light here. So we're using the blend modes to tint the colour. We can use saturation, which will take the brightness of the light pixels and it would change how saturated the underlying content is. So we can use lights not only as lights but as a way to control and manipulate the content underneath, which is really handy. And some of them have an invert option, so like with saturation, if I invert that then that becomes desaturated. So in addition, if we just concentrate on this picture background, another key setting is the mapping. So this picture background light is the width is 100 and the height is 100. If I make those smaller, we can see that this effectively is planar mapped. It's just mapped straight onto that image space. It's not distorted at all. This is because the mapping is planar. If I change that to 3D, it will behave like a 3D light source, and wherever I move that, it's mapped on the HDRI map. Okay, and then if I change the mapping to spherical, that image is mapped around the entire sphere, and the handle, the orange dot, is like the North Pole, and I'm dragging that around the sphere so that I can change the angle of that HDRI map and wrap it around the sphere in a different way. So if I drag it all the way to the bottom, the map is upside down, and if I drag it to the middle, I've put the map on its side. So you can totally change the orientation of any loaded map, and that's the 3 different mapping modes. So I'm going to return that to planar, and I'll make the width 100 and the height 100, and I will use the default, double click on latitude, double click on longitude, and they will go back to the default location. So there's a lot to get through, and that covers the a really quick view of the properties section. So we understand the light list, we understand how the order of the lights change, how they're composited, and what light affects what, because lights at the top affect everything underneath. In terms of the sliders, they can be a little bit fiddly if you wanted to change something, the size of something, we have these light controls which give you another way to control the lights. So if I turn on say this round light here, it was a round light, and if I click and hold and drag on this first control, it will do a scale of the light maintaining its current proportions. If I click and hold and drag, I could change the width. If I click and hold and drag, I could change the height. If I click and hold and drag left and right, I can change the rotation, and I can click and change the brightness. So these light controls provide a kind of a faster and easier way than diving over here and controlling things with the sliders. They just are a bit easier and more immediate to use. So the final panel that we've not looked at is the presets panel. This provides a huge amount of functionality in HDR Light Studio. I'm just going to delete all lights. So primarily this is used for being able to, there's a huge library of light sources that come with HDR Light Studio, and those are contained in here. And with this drop down, we have lights selected and we have studio lights by default. So I can drag and drop onto my model where I want it using light paint, and then reposition. So this is, you literally drag and drop on your 3D model where you want that light to appear, and it will use light paint to position it. So using these presets, we could begin to light a model really quick and really easy, and then we can use light controls to just kind of scale up the light, make it brighter. And there's a huge amount of different types of content in this library. There's over 200 HDR captures of light sources in here. So if I could also drag and drop onto the canvas, and if I was to zoom in to this light, you can actually see the amount of detail that is held within these captures. They're pretty much all of them are 4K, so we're throwing around huge images with lots of quality there for your lighting, which you'll see in the reflections, and they'll provide, when you render the final output, really high quality. So as well as lights in here, which there's a vast array of content, we've got things like clouds. Now they work really well with the procedural sky that we have. So if I make a sky background, and then we can drag and drop clouds into the background, they're really handy. And there's all sorts, absolutely all sorts. If I show all of the lights, here's all the different lights. We even have things like backgrounds. If I double click, it will add it to the lighting design as well, and it will position it in the position that's held within the file. So I'll double click that, and then you go, I've got a background on that, and then I can just add lights, and it's just a great way to light. So if I go down to rigs, these are presets for entire lighting designs. So if I edit and delete all, and I say double click on one of these, it will load a preset lighting design where everything is adjustable, scalable, change the color, change anything. So this provides all the benefits of a HDRI map, but everything is adjustable, and you can add additional lights and do what you like to this lighting design. So you can also save your own presets. So the ones with the little U in the corner, they're user presets. So at any point in time, I might have a lighting design I really like, and I can just create either a light preset for the selected light or a rig preset. So these are really handy. There's also presets for the content. So you might have a light that you've already positioned. So if I say pick the right light here, and then I go to the content images and look at the studio lights, and I right click apply to current light, I can hot swap the appearance of any light with any other one of these presets. Now that could be content gradients, and that if I right click now, apply to current light, or it could be content box grads. So there's a huge amount of things you can do with the presets, not only with the ones that come out of the box with HDR Light Studio, but the ones that you can create yourself. Okay, so that's a really good kind of overview of, you know, the features of HDR Light Studio. You always finish the project by pressing the HDR button, where you render, you choose a file location and a name, and you render out your final content. One final thing that I haven't shown you, which is a big feature and supported by a growing number of connections, is area lights. Now, so far we've just been manipulating a HDRI map. I can pick any of these 3D lights, and there is a setting called Area Light. If I enable that, and then I get a distance control, which is Smart Dolly, I actually have this. So if I just hide all the other lights, I now have a 3D light source that I can move around my model, and it makes a light in 3D. And then I can use the Smart Dolly to position that light around the model. This is probably more obvious if I load the demo model of the kettle. And then let's just put the color of that up. Okay. So if I now click on this kettle, and then I adjust the distance, you can see that light, even though you see it on the map here, it is created in 3D. If I just keep zooming out, you will see this. Zoom that out. Okay, and then we'll use light paint. So we're literally moving a 3D light around this model. And if you use this connected to your 3D software, it will make that light in your 3D software, which we'll come on to shortly. If you don't want this as a 3D light source, you uncheck this tick box and the light will be returned to the HDRI map. So there was a lot to get through there, guys. I'm running over on time a little bit, but that gives you an overview of what the software does. So if we go back to our PDF, so let's look at the features you would have if you connected HDR Light Studio to your 3D software. So effectively, the content, the HDRI map you'll be making in HDR Light Studio is updated inside of your 3D app in real time. This means as you light in HDR Light Studio, if you have interactive rendering running, you will see that update in real time as you work. And you get to see the lighting interact with your final shaders. Also, the lighting project that is within HDR Light Studio is embedded inside your scene file. So if you were using this with 3ds Max, you would be next time you wanted to work on that 3ds Max project, you would start HDR Light Studio and your project would automatically load in because it's embedded in 3ds Max. You can click on the model in your 3D software and that will move lights in HDR Light Studio, which is a really good feature. With a connection, you can directly push the model that's in your software directly over into HDR Light Studio, and you can then click on it and light paint, and where it's all very fast and very interactive. You can also, in some of the connections, display your interactive renderer inside HDR Light Studio, where you can click on the model and position lights, this provides a brilliant workflow because you just fill your screen with HDR Light Studio and you totally concentrate on the lighting, and you can see the final result directly on your final render. When you use area lights and create area lights in HDR Light Studio, when you are connected, these are created in real time as emitters or as lights with all the shaders set up and with the HDR content mapped from HDR Light Studio onto the lights in your 3D software. So within a single click, the lights are created, they're super easy to control, and it saves a lot of time compared to manually creating those light sources. Okay, so in terms of the demo of just how HDR Light Studio works, how it's been put together, that concludes that demo. We've been answering questions as we go along, and I think pretty much Louisa, yeah, you've been answering those, and you've pretty much on top of those questions. So I think if there's anything that we've not covered in today's webinar, if you have specific questions that you come up with or you think about, just email us at support@lightmap.co.uk, and we'd be delighted to help you with that and explain things further. The features that are available when you use HDR Light Studio with a connection and your 3D software, they vary depending on the connection. So you want to look at the web page on our site to do with that. We have a page for every connection and what you can do with it. I'd just like to finish by thanking you for spending some time coming and watching this presentation. We really appreciate it. And that is the end of our webinar. So thank you for coming, and we look forward to hearing from you at support@lightmap.co.uk with any questions. Thanks very much. Bye guys.